Welcome back, everybody, to another Voices with Vervaeke. This is the fourth in a series I've been doing with Johannes Niederhauser and Daniel Zaruba. The overall arc of this is trying to bring Platonism and phenomenology back together again, so as to deepen our understanding of intelligibility, its relationship to being, in a way that is not abstract conceptual, but is deeply existential. And so, first of all, it's great to see you gentlemen again, and I'm looking forward to today a lot.
Same. Good to see you again, John.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you here, Daniel. So I had the good pleasure of talking with John Rusin yesterday. I'm not sure how the videos will come out. His video will probably come out before this one, but maybe not. John has had a significant influence on me. His book, Bearing Witness to Epiphany and the Musicality of Being, just a deep impact on me, and it's come into these discussions. I'm currently reading his book on the Republic. I think it's Money, Politics, and Persuasion, and he's talking, and the central topic is the logos and our ambivalent relationship to it. The thing that came out in the dialogue that's pertinent to us right now is I described this project, and I saw John's project as the same, that he's trying to afford an integration, but also a reciprocal reconstruction and a revivification of Platonism and phenomenology. And John was very happy with that description of his work, and we explored it together, and it became very clear that he wasn't interested in Platonism as a dialogue, or a discourse about the otherworldly, and he didn't see that that's what was actually going on. He said his favorite book of all time is The Apology, and you can see why that would be. But he also said but then he read the Symposium, and that was also his favorite book of all time. And so what came clear with talking to John was that he was interested in this connection between, right? He said he would go out and read phenomenology, and then he would come back and he would just see all of this in Plato. And John's a deep thinker, and he's a clear thinker, and he's an honest thinker, and I think that he should be taken at his word. And he saw it especially in people's love lives, all the different loves they experience, and how that puts them into a particular kind of ontological stance that's important. And he talks a lot about how this is found within something he's devoted a book to, maturation. And maturity is this word that's both a descriptive word and the description of and the referent to a virtue. And he talked about maturation at the core of it. And he actually did this at a talk in UTism in Toronto, how that's turning towards the real. Maturation is an increasing capacity. That's why you're never finished. And he saw Plato as talking about that, and there's deep connections between love and turning towards the real, and deep ways in which that can go awry. So that has me all charged in both senses of the word with something I want to bring into our dialogos, which is, we've talked a lot about the return of the forms and this integration of Platonism and phenomenology in eidetic eduction and dialectic into dialogos, and we've talked about that with respect to intelligibility and the one and the many as being inherently dialogical, and therefore the deep conformity. But what we haven't talked about, at least as foregrounded and as explicitly central, was the thing that concerned, I think, Plato and Socrates, and also Nishida, and especially Nishitani, was a word. I have to invoke a word here that I'm unhappy with, and that is part of the problem, right? But what does this mean for the spirituality of the individual? And what I mean by that is something beyond just the existential. It includes but it is not identical with the existential. It has an aspirational dimension to it. It has a dimension of transformation. It has a dimension of the amelioration of suffering, the affordance of flourishing. It has the connotation of awakening from self-deception. I'm trying to package these all into this nebulous and fraught term spirituality. What does all of this have? What is the spirituality that we should educe from everything we have been discussing so far? That's the problem, the question I want to pose to us, because I think if we do not address it, we are not ultimately being just to the people we are discussing, because I think their deepest concern was for such a spiritual realization. So I've talked a lot, and I'm going to shut up so that other people can be convinced of the fact that you both have voices, and that I want to hear what, take time too. What's your initial, response framing?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay. Yeah, so one thing that you said, right, was that Platonism is not otherworldly. And I think Nishitani is quite good on that when he says, well, we are, right, the field, what he calls the field of emptiness or shunyata, that we are kind of like, towards we are aspiring to is actually on a near side and not on a kind of transcendent far side. And right, for Nishitani, it's always about getting into a greater conformity and participation with the real self-realization of reality for its own sake.
Yes, yes.
And now right, that the gap seems to me then now to be, right, when you say maturation is that which allows us to participate with that.
Yeah.
How can we become spiritually mature? How can we bear and endure the real in that sense? How can we do that? And the first thing when I heard you talking was that came to my mind was metanoia, of course, which is what we, before we started the recording, right, which can both this can be achieved both by the leap of reason and by the leap of faith.
Yes.
Albeit they are different of kind in how metanoia is achieved. Mm-hmm. But that's I think where like the key of spirituality lies in, and perhaps, right, because I think we need a dialectic of the leap of reason and the leap of faith, because we can I think we can self-deceive us sometimes when we take a leap of faith, and then we need this learned ignorance, so it helps us to kind of like keep that self-deception in check, so to say. But then with the leap of reason, the danger is that we kind of like become again enticed or inframed again by the realm of just reason. Mm-hmm. So that's then the leap of faith is also kind of like dialectical counterpart to that. But ultimately, I think we need a kind of like mediation between those two, as kind of like a twofold metanoia that might help us to achieve that kind of spiritual maturation that you were talking of.
So I'll just quickly reply just to make sure I'm getting you and what was really landing. And then I want to hear what Johannes said. I really liked this idea of the dialectic between the leap of faith. And of course, Kierkegaard is in mind here. But of course, when you read the fragments and Climacus, Johannes Climacus, where he's talking about the Socrates and the religious hypothesis, you quickly see that although they're opposed, they're also interwoven. And that's exactly what you were saying. and because of course Socrates has his daemonium, and all kinds of things are going on in Socrates as well. So yeah, I like the idea. I don't know if you quite said this, but I heard you saying it, so I know the difference between them. Learned. I call it both learned and learned ignorance, to try and pick up on the double meaning that's available to us in that term. Learned and learned ignorance is exactly the horizon of the leap of faith and the leap of reason, and that being pivotal for spiritual maturation. I like the way you put that together. One thing that comes out, and then I'll turn it over to Johannes, is, and I'm not trying to make this just a psychological question, but I'm not also excluding psychology. How does the real self-realization of the real help one to find the horizon and to dance the dialectic between the leap of reason and the leap of faith? That's now, you helped me get clearer on the question I want to ask. How does coming into conformity to the real self-realization of reality for its own sake, and we've discussed how that can be understood very platonically and very much in Nishitani's way, and that those are convergent. How does that actually afford, empower, demand, challenge us to find the horizon of spiritual maturation and dance the dialectic between the leap of reason and the leap of faith? That's the question that I now hear from you. So first of all, Daniel, is that fair? What I just did was great. So now I'll pass things to Johannes.
All right, thank you. I have just a brief comment in the original sense, I hope, of the word.
Yeah, which is, I don't know the etymology. What's the original sense of the word comment?
Mentare means to think, and com means with. So to think with.
Oh,
to think with and along, rather than to, well, you know.
Yeah, I see.
It was a fascinating talk, but here's everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah.
So I'll keep it brief, because I think I want to hear more from both of you first here. The return of the forms came out of, I think, the second dialogue.
Yes. Yes.
Now, to have a bit of a ridiculous slogan here. Sorry, my camera's back up. One could say perhaps real Platonism has never been tried. Yes. So there's the schoolyard Platonism of Nietzsche is I don't even think that Nietzsche himself believed that. I think that what Nietzsche criticized were Platonists of his time, who thought that there was actually a two-world theory in play. The word for world in Greek is cosmos, which is a continuum. It would make no sense to assume a world outside it, which becomes apparent in Aristotle, even clearer than perhaps in Plato. Yes, I know that there's in Timaeus there's mention of the upbuild, or so we could almost say a copy or so of primordial images, but they need not be residing somewhere entirely outside. And I think when I say real Platonism has never been tried, maybe real Platonic forms have never been tried, in the sense that we would have to turn to a close reading, and I'm trying that again at the moment on my own, of Plato's Parmenides dialogue.
Right.
Where perhaps what we learn, which is basically about the one and the many.
Yes, yes.
The forms are here, and they are participating. So the metexis is the word, so meta echein, to have and be with, which perhaps in some way also relates, we could playfully assume, with meta noiein. So the question is always about the meta, and I think the meta, I mean, not the meta, but the META, that we tend to go beyond, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's but the maturation, and maybe I'm going beyond what is currently at stake, but maybe to mature is to move away from say, a representational way of looking at this, which is not one of thinking it through. It's easier to assume or to imagine two worlds and have the forms up here and ephemeral things down here,
Yes.
than thinking through and because that's easier to, in a way, to combine the abstract with the concrete.
Yes.
And bring them together, rather than trying to think through language, poetic language, existentially, also maybe in certain activities or actions or exercises, etc., how the concrete and the abstract come together. So that, because the concrete itself is not given, concrete comes from concrescere, to grow together.
Right.
So it's something that has grown to. It's not, again, not just given. Here's that world and there's that world. So in that sense, that return of the forms is you could almost say perhaps a continuous return.
Yes.
It's not just a once, oh, here they are, back on the shelf, all available again.
Oh, there they are, behind those books.
I think beauty is on offer at the moment. So no, it's that return we have to enact all the time. And we have to enact it within. We've alluded to this before, that there's no one moment of complete enlightenment.
Yes.
There's no one moment of complete awakening. We can awaken to something and then return back into a bit of we must return to forgetting, come back, etc. But that would be something I've been able to hear, or maybe educe, if that's the right word. So for now.
So let me just also do again to make sure I've heard this, and then I'll offer something more and we can pick it up again. So I heard something really good in that, Johannes. I heard, well, that I found really good. Sure, so I should choose my language more carefully. That, right, there's a deep, so in the Parmenides, the forms are here, and sort of, there's a connection between participation, especially in the Greek, the two metas, the meta of participation and the meta of metanoia. And I keep returning to it, no pun intended, to Sandy's book on the Parmenides, because he makes the following astonishing argument. He says that you have to treat the Parmenides, in our language, as a spiritual exercise. And what it's doing is it's using Socrates as an exemplar. It's trying to teach you a new way of seeing, a new way of thinking. And then and it's you have to give birth to it. It's not just about shifting the propositions, it's about shifting the fundamental grammar of your cognition and your perception. And then once you learn to think in this non-thingy way, this is how he puts it, then the theory of the forms becomes like obvious. That's his claim. And he claims that people have read it the wrong way. They've been trying to, without doing the transformation, they've been trying to get the argument in the Parmenides. And so this idea that there's a deep connection between participation and metanoia, I heard that, and I think that's really profound. I can say that that's part of the intent of these two practices. I've been talking about in the relationship between them, the eidetic eduction practice and the dialectic and the dialogus practice is exactly that. So what I want to ask you, Johannes, is if you're happy with, I get this from Ursula Goodenough, great name, by the way. I believe that's her name. And she's been working very hard on a kind of deep, what she calls sort of a deep secular spirituality. And she makes the distinction between transcendence beyond and transcendence into. And I mentioned this, I think, before we started the recording. And I'm hearing that as really, it's a bit of a slogan, but you introduced the slogan too. Platonism has never been tried. So is this at least a helpful way of naming the distinction, right? There's a transcendence, which we've understood, and it goes into the etymology, transcendence as beyond. But she talks about this a sense of transcendence into, and I hear that in what you're saying. Does that land for you as a way of trying to articulate I want just some quick a term so we can quickly point to a distinction that I heard woven through everything you said.
Yeah, I haven't read that particular book, but you'll find similar passages in Hegel's Science of Logic on the bad and good infinite.
Right.
Whereas in a certain way, the bad infinite is an attempt to, or portrays an attempt to go to transcend, or in the image of a Christian heaven, is Hegel's example. That's an example of a bad infinite,
Right.
of a transcendence that goes beyond, instead of the possibility, say, of heaven on earth. And this, so I think in Heidegger is similar. I've seen other people speak of an immanent transcendence, or
Yes,
so, in that regard.
Yes.
And there was something else you mentioned before briefly, the unthingy. Was that, did I hear you right?
Yeah, a non-thingy way of thinking, right?
Yeah, well, in a more technical term, it's the attempt is to avoid reification.
Yes.
Whereas, of course, and now very briefly to come back to Hegel, not to refer to authority, I have to be careful, but to show what we can learn from his Science of Logic, namely that there's always an interplay between the understanding, which wants to, for Hegel, which wants to hold on to something and corroborate, whereas reason has the task to let go. So we need to some degree reify, but then we need to be able to let go as well. And that could be, for example, is more a way of articulating the relationship between the forms and the real, or in what sense the forms are real, without reifying again back to an imagined transcendent world. Yes.
So that's fantastic. And then, so what I want to do is I want to take that what you just said is great, and it jams well in the good sense of like jazz with what I want to say now, because I want to propose transforming transcendence into transcendence through, where we're double playing on the word through, meaning going beyond while remaining within, because that's what the word through says, and also by means of, because if you think about it, I overemphasized, I didn't pick up enough on what Rusin would call the musicality of eidetic adduction, and what I heard you doing from Hegel was exactly that. And I think what I'm going to say will help bring back in the leap of faith and the leap of reason, and Daniel's proposal, which I think is a gem we got to keep to. That something about the horizon, right? Spiritual maturity is where the horizon of where those two interpenetrate. I think that's really profound. So in eidetic adduction, the idea is you're opening up the multi-aspectuality and you're finding the through line. And that's correct in a sense, but I want to pick up on the rhythm that Johannes just designated in Hegel, which is when you're doing eidetic adduction, you do like you're understanding in the sense of you're realizing, right? You're grasping, right? You're doing, right? You're playing with the reification machinery. That's what I'm trying to get at. Look at this aspect, look at this aspect, look at this aspect, and they somehow go together. And so you're bouncing between the scene aspects that constantly unpack the form into, right, into aspects, into things, into profiles, or to put it exactly as Johannes said, into moments of grasping. Every aspect is a moment of grasp. I grasp it as, I grasp it as, I grasp it as, I grasp it as. And that's the understanding, that's the moment of understanding. But of course, the opening up of the multi-aspectuality also empowers the through line, the throughness, which is an immanent transcendence. It's a throughness, which is a beyond within. When I go through something, I'm going beyond within it, right? And so I'm doing this, and then that's the moment of reason. That's the moment of letting go. That's the moment of letting go. Now, for me, here's the leap of reason and the leap of faith in this to a degree. And Guy Senslock is looming over us right now, which in something that Guy continually points to, which is, as I'm doing this, it's almost like an accordion of eidetic induction. And I reify in such a way that the reification is called into question so that I move forward, which affords more of this reification that deconstructs itself as reification. And I'm doing this accordion movement of, reifying, and I would call it aspectualizing and reifying, and then de-reifying, de-aspectualizing, and moving on, right? As I'm getting that leap of reason, there's the leap of faith in that something has always been coming towards me while I was doing that. That I don't discover it as completely ex nihilo de novo. I, in fact, realize it as having always somehow been present and affording. And that's so the leap. If I could, and Heraclitus is going to jump for joy. The way out and the way in are the same way. As I'm going out through the eidetic induction, and this is part of the dialectic, the dialogos, I'm realizing that it was always there somehow, affording it. And this reminds me of Tanabe and metanoetics, and how he talks about, properly getting into right relationship with Jiriki, self-power, and Tariki, other power, and getting those. And metanoetics is to properly have those interpenetrating. So that's what I wanted to do with this. And then let's just go free form now. Who wants to talk and who wants to respond?
I was just reminded of your term reinventio when
Yes.
what you said just before, right? We don't rediscover it, but we also kind of like reinvent it in that sense.
Yes.
Not as a kind of like creatio ex nihilo, but in this sense you just explained it.
But just as anecdote, when John and I were on stage in London a month ago, and who knows, it will be out at some point, that dialogue. We just have to figure out when and where and how and who. But there was someone at the end who asked a question, who said, "But aren't you just reinventing the wheel?" And I was about to say, "Yes, of course." But we have to. We have to. Okay, where's my Goethe? Of course, he's right. Goethe has I think it's not that well known anymore. He has a collection of maxims and reflections.
Yes.
The very first maxim is: Alles Gescheite ist schon gedacht worden, man muss nur versuchen, es noch einmal zu denken. Everything that is intelligent or relevant, because we say, has already been thought. One must only try to think it once more.
That's yes.
It sounds very banal almost, right? But when there's, even Heidegger has to concede that fact at some point. At the end of his life, he says in a Freiburg talk, "There's nothing new under the sun." No, there isn't. But with the need to reinvent, to bring to the fore, to let it come out and come in, to invenir, let it come in as well. That's always there. Or else we wouldn't be in need to mature to come back to that notion.
Yes.
We would be ready-made at birth.
Yes. And I like the notion of maturation. Oh, I hadn't thought about this, but just it's occurring to me now. And you called it out in me. The notion of maturation brings this out. Like when you're maturing, you're growing into what you always were in a very real sense, right? Yes. Right. So maturation is to bring out. I mean, we could use Aristotelian language, and it's a little bit strained around the edges of actualizing the potential, but we have to hear potential much more in the Kyoto school sense of being equally real. I picked up my copy of Goethe's complete works, or at least essential writings. So I've got to. Well, when I realized that, like I said, many people keep saying to me, "Well, are you just doing Goethe with your eidetic induction?" They seem to be speaking sincerely to me, so I want to try and go back and do that. But I want to pick up on this. I want to hear what Daniel has to say about, like, we're getting this. I think we're starting to craft how we could articulate the spirituality of what we've been talking about here.
So I really wanted to go a little bit back to the Parmenides dialogue.
Yeah, sure.
Right, because it seems to me, right, that the important point also in Tanabe is this why he thinks that an absolute critique of reason is necessary, because we need something to overcome the antinomies of reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because reason, and this is even true in an existential sense, we find ourselves always in those paradoxicalities. Tanabe, for example, talks about the choanic structure of reality.
Yes.
For example, right, that we are, for example, life see the death see the life. We are living while we are dying, or we are dying while we are living. And for example, right, thrownness and projection, or projecting thrownness in this Heideggerian sense. This is just another example. So for him, a kind of letting go of reason itself, and that in conjunction with faith, was something that reason itself had to undergo through, but this was something that was not taken radical enough in Kant itself, or in Hegel for that matter. Now, what then happens is, and then I think we can come back to this question that you were asking, where's the challenge with the spiritual maturation? I think it's exactly in that aphoretic locus, because there we are confronted with nihility. And this is this whole project with Nishitani. We have to kind of like train in that space of nihility that kind of like undermines all our verifications and our propositions at the first place, such that we can cultivate, let's say, this no thingy character, or this no thingy, what do you say, the cognitive grammar, so to say, that was proposed in this interpretation of the Parmenides dialogue. That, however, is then that makes us mature, because a confrontation with nihility is always painful and anxiety-inducing in the first place. It also confronts us with the nihility of the self, that there is no kind of like nothing we can cling to when it comes to ourselves. But if we get a taste of this and we kind of like become accustomed to that, then we can, so to say, discover this transcendence, or this through line within ourselves. And there, I think, then the spiritual practices of Nishitani and Neoplatonism, dialectic, become really crucial for this kind of new kind of spirituality that we're talking about. I just wanted to emphasize this element of death and resurrection, because I think when people today talk about spirituality, it's more like we become more ourselves, or we discover our true self. That is all great, but it's more about then really this confrontation also with death in ourselves, with the nullity in ourselves. And I think that's an important aspect, that we kind of like learn how that we learn to hold ourselves in that place of aporia and of paradox. That's even in the Zen tradition when we talk about koans. That's so important.
Yes, and in Jesus's use of parable is comparable. No pun intended. I want to pick up on that, because I think that's really, and I want to sort of slow it down and zoom in on this one point. Of course, Socrates famously said that all of philosophy is a preparation for death. But I want to think of something analogous and overlapping. So it's not just a strict analogy, and it's an analogy, but also overlaps. And this is what happens in therapy. And give me a sec, because I want to talk about this, because I think the moment when the antinomies are re-seen as paradox, that's the moment I want to zero in on. That's the pivotal moment for me. And that has to do with the phenomena you confront, or at least I would argue you often confront in therapy, which is aspect disguise. And think about how aspect disguise, how you will actually disclose aspect disguise if you do eidetic adduction. So what's aspect disguise? Aspect disguise is somebody, I'll use my standard example. Somebody comes in and says, you know, I really need help. I'm getting into so much conflict with, you know, with friends and family. Well, why? What's going? You know, it's hard to admit, but I'm stubborn. I'm a really stubborn person, and you know, it's destroying so many of my relationships. You know, oh, okay. And then you go off on it and you talk about other stuff and you come around and you're in this other place where they're talking, right? And they're not focused on that. And you say, tell me something just off the cuff. Tell me something you really like about yourself. And you'll say, well, I'm really perseverant. I keep going no matter what other people say. And they don't realize that the stubbornness and the perseverance are two different aspects of the same phenomenon. And the reason why they can't get better is because they want to let go of the stubbornness while holding on to the perseverance, right? And what you have to do is you have to do something very analogous to eidetic adduction. You have to get them to, right, see these as two different aspects of the same through line. First of all, is the example making sense? And this is a key thing. One of the challenges we face, right, in this sort of deep fundamental moment is the kairos between antinomy, which is the negative aspect of this, and paradox, which is a positive aspect of it. And the reason why I'm talking about this, I want to talk about this very carefully, is I see Kierkegaard really wrestling with this, because he sees Socrates as sort of bringing reason to the point of antinomy, but then, right, Christianity takes it over positively as the paradox that's transformative. But and you can see that he's trying to find, you know, it's like the Michelangelo, he's trying to find where the fingers are close enough so the spark leaps between those, because he realizes that Socrates' project is not the skeptical project, it's somehow a transformative project. And so, right, I think part of what we're wrestling with is how do we, sorry, this sounds so super meta that people are going to accuse me of just wanting to be a philosopher going meta on the meta, but we have this aspect disguised relationship between antinomy and paradox. And how, let me try it this way. How can we acquiesce in the paradox, be called by the paradox, without simply ignoring our antipathy towards the antinomy? So let me bring this back to like the point that Johannes said. All right, you know, it's you know, we're rediscovering, reinventio. Well, think about how that we can get something that looks very similar to that. That's exactly the opposite of everything we're talking about. So Sinclair Lewis has this wonderful short story called Travel is So Broadening, and these Americans are traveling around and they keep saying travel is so broadening, and what they do is just keep seeing every place as another instance of the small American town that they grew up in. They're not being broadened at all. They're just repeating that this is, I forget the name of their little town. This is their little town. This is their, and you get, wow, and you get, they're not, they keep invoking travel is so broadening when in fact that nothing like that's happening, right? And that looks like that's creepily similar to, right? I just keep rediscovering the same fundamental truth. So I'm trying to get at, right? For me, this is the crux, right? This is the crux. You know, how do we hold together? Because that for me is the maturity. How do we hold together the simultaneous reality of the superlativeness of the paradox and the condemnation of the antinomy? What makes the antinomy so hard is they appear to us this is Kant's point, they wouldn't bite us if they weren't contradictions. And at the core of the conforming aspect of reason is the avoidance of contradiction, right? So we're trying to, so reason can only see the antinomies as dead ends because you're always supposed to avoid contradiction, right? You don't go deeper into a dead end. That's the exact definition of fanaticism and foolishness. That's the travel is so broadening. They go deeper and deeper into the dead end. So.
Should I don't know.
Please, I'm out of words.
Okay. Maybe I need, okay, maybe first I need to know more on what your stance is then, if that's even the right word, regarding antinomy. Is it to be resolved or is it just to be withstood? Is it to be, are they to be recognized? Are they to be solved? Are they to be reconciled? Are they to be taken as the Apollonian and the Dionysian? Somewhat they go together, but they will always fight in some way. And if it's a momentary balance between them, it can be beautiful, but it can also be what's.
So, I mean, I'm really pressing Kant here. Like Kant's point, of course, is it shows us the inherent self-limitation of reason. Right?
Yes.
But I'm going to even push on the term, right? The antinomos, the loss of law, and I think the law that is being lost there is the law of no contradiction, right? That's what's being lost there. And so the question is, like, I see it as we're trying, and there's a deep analogy with Jesus, right, in his parables, right, where he's trying to pass beyond the law, but doesn't mean destroy the law, right? He's trying to somehow, right, agape is somehow going through and beyond, but not leaving the right, the law. And so that's what I'm trying to wrestle with. I'm trying to, I guess if I had to put a movement metaphor on it, Johannes, and again, I'm playing, I want to know how to transcend through the antinomies such that I want to articulate it, because I know, I believe I've done it at times, but I want to articulate it. What does it mean to pass through the antinomies, to transcend through them such that, right, they are realized as superlative? There's something, right, superlative is disclosed. And Tanabe, of course, is putting his finger on it. The life and death, the life and or death, right? The civ, we can't, that civ doesn't translate well, as you both know, into English. That's why the best translations are just the hyphenations, life, death, right?
Yeah.
So, right, and then when we try to talk about it, we invoke paradox, but and here's the point I take to be of people like Kierkegaard and Nishitani and Eckhart, right? When we speak it as paradox, but we don't experience it paradoxically. Because the paradox just sounds like the antinomy. So what we do is we basically, if you'll allow me to be a little bit oversimplistic, we speak the antinomy and then we say, but it's so much more. And then we label that with the term paradox, right? That's, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the most honest, resonant response that came from me.
I just have to, yeah, it did help. I just have to be careful not to go off into Hegel now. So I won't. But there's a reason why after Kant, Hegel goes into the mode of attempting presuppositionless thought. So suspending with all so-called laws of thinking, one of them being the principle of the law of non-contradiction.
Yes.
Inherited from Aristotelian metaphysics and not logic, by the way, right?
Yeah.
But what's, maybe very briefly to come back to, as you know, the first critique begins with a statement saying that the human reason is has this peculiar fate of being addressed by questions it cannot hope to answer.
Yes.
And what is striking to me coming after reading Heidegger is that Heidegger says this about the history of being, that we are addressed by being in its given epochs in a different way and respond to it. And the way in which then Kant, if you really take this a bit in a weird direction perhaps, the way in which Kant is addressed in his epoch is that he realizes that reason itself has gone mad. He doesn't say this, I say that. With the dogmatic metaphysicians before him, it doesn't, anyone who's listening doesn't know it, let's just say there was a time before Kant where thinkers like Leibniz and others, and names don't matter here in that context perhaps, but made up things of the mind like the monad, etc., which have no experiential content.
Yes.
And on the other hand, you had figures and thinkers like John Locke, who fantasized about spiritual matter, or David Hume, who was the most extreme, who said that there's no regularity.
Yes.
That there's nothing we can trust. So to maybe make this more, graspable, what I'm trying to say, nihilism has just crept in. Skepticism is another word for nihilism, at least to Fichte and Kant and others. So what perhaps he has to answer is that peculiar thing about reason, that it runs into antinomies, but then because of all of his presuppositions, he cannot begin to, the way he thinks doesn't allow for him to solve any of it, because he doesn't think in the way that there's a passing through them. There's a recognition of them, but there's no, as you put it, no passing through the antinomies. There's in a sense that something else could be disclosed from within going through them, rather than just the inherent dialectic of reason. Because it's, again, one-sided, maybe coming back to Denim. I don't know, I have to think about this more. But maybe coming back to that, there is already something that is there and addressing us, which he actually does say, funnily enough, at the beginning of the book.
Yes.
But then doesn't follow through with this. And the paradox, I just very, autistically perhaps just look at the word. Doxa is opinion, is appearance, is semblance, shining. It can keep us in the paradoxical state, I don't know, is perhaps, so antinomous is the loss of law, but the paradox is a loss of, it is a loss even of what appears to us. So it's a loss of sense, a loss of meaning comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, these would just be some initial remarks on this. I don't know if that.
Well, I mean, you're pointing towards the death that Kant was not willing to go through. Right?
Yeah, well, and nothingness.
Yeah.
There's this moment in the critique where he categorizes the nothing.
Yeah.
But even the nothing gets a table of categories, right? It's ens rationis and nihil negativum and a few others. But precisely that is, so I think this is why the Kyoto school is so open then to Heidegger, because he takes the nothing serious, Daniel.
Yes, he does. And even before that, or at the same time, actually. So Nishida in, I think it was 1925 or so, he publishes his Basho essay, and there he comes up with this Basho of absolute nothingness, which kind of is very similar. Some scholars have identified as great similarity to the clearing in Heidegger, kind of something that's like the cut, right? Something that clears itself but doesn't refer to any being in that sense. So it's really ontologically different, and he called this the place, Basho is place of absolute nothingness. And then Tanabe and Nishitani later didn't want to adopt that language and took then really Shunyata again from the Mahayana Buddhist tradition to label what he specifically meant.
I just want to interject. The clearing in Heidegger, I think very, very clearly, pun intended, comes from Eckhart. right? Where you have to make the clearing within,
yeah,
right, in order for the Son of God to be born within you, right? And so I want to point out that the clearing also has a Neoplatonic heritage to it as well.
I think what I wanted to say just before, right? The example that came to my mind is one that you, John, were often using with proleptic rationality.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When you have two parents and they decide if they want to have a child,
Yes.
they will never be able to figure out with means of reasoning about it if they really can have a child or should have a child or should have not a child. But they have to kind of like make the leap of transcendence, the leap of faith, so to say,
Yes.
such and have a child, and then they will know if they should have gotten a child or not. There is this necessity of transformation, and so to say, and there we have a death of reason as well in that example, such that then after this, so to say, transformative arc, then we can appreciate maybe the antinomical structure that let's say we were in before that, but now, right, it has been resolved and reality has come to a right potential, right, the potential has been actualized, and that's then where reality realizes itself, maybe in that example.
Oh, that's very helpful. That's very good. And then that allows me to bridge back. So 2 points. Thomas Nagel makes it very clear in his article, The Absurd, that absurdity is not produced by reasoning, it's produced by a clash of perspectives, right? And we will always, in this, and then to link to what you just said, we will always experience the clash of perspectives, excuse me, when we're engaged in such transformative movements, right? And that's part of what L.A. Paul's talking about. So I think that brings it there. That's the crucial moment. And part of the proleptic rationality then is, and you can see why this will circle us back to the spirituality. And this was the heart of my talk at Cambridge. The role that the imaginal plays in affording the transformations of rationality that are actually integral to rationality. Where what I mean, so ritual is that which brings the imaginal into serious play. And it's the serious play with the imaginal such that the affordance of transformation that is integral to the maturation of rationality are actually enacted. So we get ritual, the way it is deeply presupposed within rationality, as being where we can seriously play with the imaginal in order to properly mature our rationality. That's what's coming out to me as the kind of spirituality that we're talking about here. And I find that it requires the kind of discernment of the therapist. How do we discern the difference that makes a difference, the difference that is affording the real self-realization of reality for its own sake, between the serious play of the imaginal in the ritual, in the way I'm using the word ritual, and the way Freud denigrated the term, where the ritual is synonymous with the neurotic. So there's an aspect disguise relationship potentially there, or maybe there isn't. Maybe there's a needed discernment of distinction. What is the relevant difference? And you can't describe it teleologically, right? Of course you can. I'm not prohibiting it, but it's not helpful in this discussion to describe it. Well, the ritual that is good is the one that affords rationality, and the one that's bad is the one that doesn't. Yes, but right, we're in the space of the antinomy. We're in the space of lawlessness. What are we using in order to discern? Because spirituality, I would propose to you, is ultimately about the artistry, the virtuosity and virtue of discernment, right? Discerning the spirits is one of the original meanings of spirituality, and I think that's appropriate here. How do we discern the difference in the liminal antinomous place between neurotic ritual and sapiential ritual? To me, that is the pressing central practicable, I don't want to say practical because that word doesn't mean what I want to say. That's the central practicable question of spirituality, the discerning of the spirits. And I'm not trying to make it precise as, given this argument where we've got to, how do we discern between the neurotic ritual and the sapiential ritual while we are within the liminal zone? So that's an easy question, right? We can just toss off an answer. But I think giving a deeply responsive and responsible, and John Rusin and I talked about the relationship between, you have to develop deep responsiveness before deep responsibility becomes possible. But developing a deep, responsive, and responsible answer, not a completion, not a conclusion, but a response, a responsible response, to play on the terms, to my question, I think is at the heart of what I want to understand as the current project of spirituality. So first of all, thank you for this dialogos, because I think we're zeroing in on the question that I want to ask.
It's really great. And I appreciate what you just did in the last minutes. So it's again, right? How can we turn away, let's say, from our antipathy of the antinomies to the superlativeness of the paradox? And
how can we do that responsibly? That's what, right?
Yeah. My initial response would be, right, that we need techniques such that we can learn to hold ourselves in that hyphenated space.
Yes.
In that Siva space, in that in-between space, in this middle space, in this middle ground as well.
Yeah.
And such that we get a glimpse of the, first of all, we get a glimpse, a kind of like an aspirational glimpse towards we can look at from, let's say, the superlative notion,
right.
But we also have a kind of care or so, or we learn to endure kind of like that's what we don't want to look at, the kind of like place that we have antipathy towards.
Right.
But a kind of place where we kind of like juggle and dance in between those two, but where we kind of like slowly but steadily get an appreciation for this aspirational aspect of spirituality without kind of like dismissing the other side of the through line, because if we would do that, we would bypass it, and then
yes.
The project wouldn't be of any help. So it's a constant moving in between that space. Am I understanding you rightly?
You are. And then I want to ask back, are you sort of alluding to the possibility of something analogous to stereoscopic vision, where right, where you get the two and there's a reciprocal appreciation of the two that actually affords seeing through them. That's exactly that the seeing through of stereoscopic vision is exactly the transcendence through that I'm talking about. That stereoscopic vision, that transcendence through. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah. That's also, by the way, that's right what Nishitani kind of argues for in his text. So Johannes and myself read his essay, Science and Zen, and he really argues for a stereoscopic vision, because what he calls the field of life, or this teleological direction, this upward direction, and then the field of death of science, so to say, because they really belong to one, so that to one reality that has this kind of like stereoscopic nature to it.
Yes. Which goes back to the dialectical nature of reality we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, no, and then I see, right, I think you argued this in this paper with Chris on dialectic into dialogos.
Yes.
That the Neoplatonic practices and dialectic into dialogos can help us to kind of like slowly, right, have an appreciation both for the nothingness and the nothingness, so to say, and that we kind of learn to hold ourselves in this in-between space between those two. And it seems to me that the Parmenides dialogue kind of like puts us in the same in-between space between the one and the many, or the many and the one.
Yes. Oh, wow. Wow, that's really good. That's really good. So I'm thinking here now of MacIntyre, and how he talks about you can't, and you can even see this in Aristotle, you can't talk about a virtue as if it appears de novo. It emerges out of a field in which, where there's a domain in which various kinds of expertise are possible. Virtue doesn't just emanate top down from conceptual heaven. It also emerges bottom up from practice. And so I'm also starting to hear, in what you just said, right, the possibility of responsibility in that, right, when we're in the space of no law, that's actually a criticality space. That's a kairos. That's a space in which, right, we're allowing the emergence of self-organization. This is what we do in insight. We destroy the frame. We throw ourselves into the self-organization of the dynamics of cognition, and we entrust ourselves to the fact that that will engender or emerge a new gestalt, a new way, right? And so what I'm hearing you say is, MacIntyre says that ultimately, virtue, you don't get virtue and then the emergence of practice, and you don't get practice and the emergence of virtue. You get the co-emergence of practice and virtue. And so if we have practices that start to order us in a new way, then we will be responsible to them as we start to realize the virtues now possible to us that were not possible before. And weirdly, this sounds like Nietzsche's transvaluation of all values. I'm just doing the transvirtuation of all virtues or something. That's such a horrible term. I don't use it again. But right? Am I picking up on something here? I'm picking up on the fact that we may be premature in trying to articulate this theoretically. What we need to do is to move into practices that our distributed cognition recognize as being appropriate to this area, right? And then only after the practices take root can we bear to look at the fruit in terms of a discourse of the virtues. Because when I'm talking about responsibility, I'm asking for the set of virtues. I'm sorry, I'm really at the edge of my thinking here. I'm really trying to articulate something here about that there's an onto-epistemological priority to getting viable practice in here, that people that are collective intelligence, because what else do we have other than that, reliably says to us, this comports you to and through this liminal period. And only when the practices are there that are reliably engendering this stereoscopic vision do we try to then reflect upon the virtues that might be growing therein. That's what I'm hearing coming out of this. Is that viable? Does that land with the two of you, or have I gone astray?
Do you want to respond, Johannes? I think this was right. There's a deep reciprocal relationship, and the more we deepen our practice, then the more we can eidetically deduce also, let's say, the virtue.
Yeah, yes.
And then we come back to the practice, and then we kind of like then we disclose something more. So this is this ongoing, inexhaustible transformation. So this transforming of transformation that we then are doing, I think, in this aspirational project that is ultimately inexhaustible. I think
Yes.
I think you said that very well, actually. What was the point of that you were asking about then?
Well, I mean, I'm saying like we increasingly we do practices, both individual and collective,
Yeah.
for engendering the stereoscopic vision of nothingness and nothingness, between the rejection of the antinomy and the approach of the superlative paradox, right? And we're trying to get that. And other than getting a lot of people to practice and to dialogue with each other about the practice, I don't think the question I posed we can bring much language to it right now, because it's only when we're doing a lot of this that we open up, as you said, a possible field of eidetic induction, so that we can start to articulate how we can do these practices responsibly, right? So, I mean, we're kind of like where Aristotle was before he drew from the practices of argumentation, drew out logic, right? You have to have a lot of that going. You have to have a lot has to happen to dialogue before Aristotle can make the logic possible, right? I mean, I won't go into the deeper ideas behind that, but I think we're sort of at the stage of the pre-Socratics with respect to the question I asked. And we're trying to move into the Platonic, and I'm asking a question that's sort of almost Aristotelian in nature. And I feel like what's come out of it for me is a kind of impatient prematurity, a lack of maturation on my part, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't have done the discussion. I think the discussion has been powerful, but perhaps part of the spirituality of discernment that I'm talking about is also the patience to let things grow so they can be properly disclosed. Karl Popper famously, people forget what Popper said. Falsification. Well, Popper also said, don't try and falsify an immature hypothesis. Right? You have to let it grow. It has to be bold and growing, and then you try and falsify it. Then you bring, because if you don't let it mature, you're actually working in something that's vague to you in a profound way. That's what I'm getting to. I'm getting to a kind of humility, hopefully, around this.
We may just be, in a weird way, analogous to the early Greeks anyways.
Yes, yeah.
Where on some level, of course, we can play around with Aristotle and Plato or Aquinas, etc., etc., and we have everything at hand. And this is also the strange time in which we are, where we can go and say, oh, this and then that, and it's all up on the shelf somehow. And how that even is possible to me is mind-blowing. But what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that there's a circular history and that everything repeats at some point, but that there are things that run in parallel.
Yes.
And sometimes we are we are speaking here on a channel that, became known for the Meaning Crisis lecture series.
Right.
So I would be, I wouldn't be wrong to assume that the host and maybe also the listeners are stoutly aware of a certain crisis that's happening. And that crisis, however, I would say is not very young. It's now in its second or third century. That the word crisis is being thrown around. But nothing is coming to. Crisis means decision.
Yes.
But no decision is being formed. There's nothing is seemingly decided. There's one crisis after another. It is, we've got politics through crisis now, for specific reasons. And I think those are analogous in the sense that while we have all this wealth, but perhaps also baggage of our, history of ideas, let's say, or theories, at the same time, we don't need to presuppose a law of non-contradiction necessarily, just because it has grown into that. We can try and think again in such a way that to us what we can refer to as the forms or so, but to us, the phenomena begin to appear as meaningful again.
Yes.
And once that occurs, and this is maybe also why practice is so important, because then it's real. It ties you to something that's real and that we can, almost grasp and touch, etc. Then we can come back to an original in that sense, perhaps then we can come back to an original rereading, refinding of those texts of old, so that again they become our own and are not just abstract theories one after another that just lead to more confusion. But we try to there's so much talk about philosophy as a way of life. Yes, but then we have to suspend with almost everything. Yes, I think, and come back to an original mode of seeing the world. And once that seeing begins, then I think we can begin to go back and see what speaks to us, not what we need, but what we need in a profound sense, yes, but what speaks to us after the initial opening up to that.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's a way of, at least, and I don't mean this, preliminal, right on the threshold. That's a preliminary way of talking about how we can be responsible in the liminal space. Is it opening, like, some of the things we've talked about? Are we getting reciprocal opening? Are we getting amelioration and alleviation from the meaning crisis? Are we getting a renewal of the sources of meaning within our lives? I think these are all important criteria that we should hold on to. And I want to get the precipice notion of preliminary in the word preliminary there. I think that's exactly right. I think we have to bring it to a close, but I think we should keep going. Maybe we'll have another dialogue on Johannes's channel, and keep this flowing. I think we need at least one more of these. That's what I feel. But
I agree. Very good. Yes.
So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dan.